Neither fresh milled flour or sourdough need to be complicated and confusing. You can really simplify these processes, and with a few simple techniques and tricks, you can be making gorgeous, delicious, and nutritious bread without any stress or really any fancy and crazy equipment. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Grain to Table series. This is the final installment in a 4-part series where we walk through everything from where to source and how to store whole grains, milling flour, which mill would be right for you, and now finally baking bread. So if you missed those other episodes, check the link in this video's description so you can go back and catch those. Today I'm gonna share with you a really basic fresh milled flour recipe that happens to make the most gorgeous baguettes. It is simple, there's no crazy equipment. We're gonna be baking with sourdough starter straight from the fridge, and this comes in at about 78 cents per loaf. So it's also really economical. Let's get to it. The base of this recipe is fresh milled flour. So the majority is going to be a hard white wheat. This is a nice, neutral, strong bread flour. It's high protein, it's good gluten development, easy to work with. I'm also gonna add a portion of kamut because this brings such wonderful flavor. You could also sub this out for 100% white wheat. You could do 100% hard red wheat. You could use a small portion of rye or spelt or barley, any other ancient grain or heirloom grain that you want. This is very easy as long as the majority of your grain is gonna be one of the hard wheats. This will work out really similarly. Next, we're gonna use about 2 teaspoons of salt. You can use any kind of salt you like. I do prefer a fine grind rather than a coarse chunky salt because that won't dissolve into your recipe very well. If you're gonna use a really chunky salt, I would put a little bit of water in it and dissolve it first before adding it to your recipe. You're gonna need some water. The only thing to note with the water is that you want to use something unchlorinated. Chlorinated water will mess with your yeast, your sourdough. It will inhibit your rise a little bit. And you can use either room temperature or warm water. Last but not least, we need some starter. You could adapt this recipe to using commercial yeast. I'm going to be using sourdough, and I think that is the best way to get the most flavor and nutrition out of your fresh milled flour. I'm using a stiff starter, and I have transitioned all of my baking to a stiff starter because I think it just works a lot more smoothly and seamlessly for the style of baking that I like. But if you have a liquid starter, we can still make that work. The only other tools you need are a couple of mixing bowls, a grain mill, and some kind of baking tray. We're not gonna be using a Dutch oven or anything fancy. A cookie sheet, a baking stone, whatever you have will work. I am a big believer in learning the feel more than stressing out about every single gram. If you would like to use a scale and measure everything out really exactly, that is great. I'm gonna give gram measurements. But if you wanna just measure a little bit more loosely, that's what I like to do. We're gonna start with 3 cups of grains. And I'm not gonna measure exactly the split for this, about 20–30%. But if you follow me for any length of time, you know I'm a little bit more flexible. I really don't stress too much about getting things super, super exact. I don't think it's necessary. So we're gonna start with about 3 cups, or that equals about 500 grams of grains. And we're gonna get that ground on a nice fine setting. I source pretty much all of my grains from AZURE Standard. They have a great selection and great prices on quality grains. If you want to check them out, you can use the link in this video's description, and I even have a coupon code so you can save an extra 15%. So here is the first step that differs with fresh milled flour than conventional white bread flour. You may already have heard of an autolyse if you are into sourdough. And that is basically a step where you allow your flour to hydrate before you add the salt, and often before you even add the starter. So I usually go with something called a fermentolyse, where I add the water and I add the starter to my dough and I let it hydrate like that. But I hold off on adding the salt for at least half an hour up to an hour or two even. Now this is important when you are using fresh milled flour because you have all of that bran and all of that germ, and that needs a little bit more time to soften and hydrate before you start trying to build gluten and add structure to your dough. When you're using a conventional white bread flour, which I did for many years, I skipped this step constantly because I'd done side-by-side comparisons and there wasn't a huge difference that made it seem worthwhile. When I made the switch to fresh milled flour about 6 years ago, I realized that this step is crucial. So if you are trying to bake with fresh milled grains and you have been skipping this step, don't. We're gonna use about 2 cups of water. And I say about because I think it is important to listen to your dough and look at how things are feeling more than just sticking strictly to your ingredients. Each batch of wheat can hydrate slightly differently just depending on the growing conditions that year. Also, your weather makes an impact. So know that you can follow things to the exact gram and you can still have slightly different results every single time, and that is normal. There we go. Okay, this is exactly what we're going for. It's still a loose, shaggy dough. We haven't really incorporated this. We're not kneading it at all yet, but there's no flour still loose in the bowl that didn't kind of get absorbed into that ball. So let's go ahead and talk about sourdough starter. Sourdough starter is not very complicated, especially if you're using whole wheat and fresh milled flours. It is going to thrive on those sorts of things. It should be fairly easy to maintain. You do not have to keep a rigorous schedule where you're feeding and discarding constantly. I have never practiced keeping a sourdough starter like that. This one came straight out of the fridge and we're gonna bake with it that way. We're going to use just a little bit. I never have really regular routine feedings and discards. And in fact, I've switched to a stiff starter in the last year, which I think just makes all the difference in the fresh milled flour breads. It rises really nicely and it has a more well-rounded flavor. And I also think that this works so much better for sweets and pastries. It's magical. I am a big fan of the stiff starter. And if you don't have one, super easy to convert one. So let's take a look. This is my starter. His name is Eugene. He just came out of the fridge this morning, and this is as big a starter as I keep. I don't measure this. I don't weigh out the grams of flour and water for feedings. I just eyeball it to about the right texture. And I only ever feed my starter when I'm baking. So I'm gonna pull off this tiniest little chunk. And this is all that I am saving to set aside to make my next starter. This is all that I'm gonna feed. So that goes back in my dish. And then this is going to serve as my starter for this batch of bread. Now this is actually a fairly generous portion for what I usually use in my fresh milled breads. If I'm gonna do a long overnight ferment in the summer when the house is warm, I will even use less, like maybe half of this. You can ferment an entire batch of bread with this much stiff starter. You really don't need very much. But if you want this whole process to go faster, you just add more starter. Now that's something I really like about the stiff starter as well. It gives you a much easier flexibility because you're not dealing with all the extra liquid coming into your recipe from a liquid starter. If you're starting with a stiff starter that is already kind of the hydration of the dough that you want to make, you can up and down the quantity of starter in your recipe without really messing up the overall hydration really easily. So really big fan of the stiff starter. And I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of gently incorporate this into the dough. Again, I'm not really kneading this, but I'm gonna just get it kind of mixed in good for its ferment-release. We're gonna cover this. We're gonna set it aside for probably about an hour before we start doing any kind of stretch and folds or kneading. And let's not forget to feed Eugene. I'm gonna go ahead and feed with just the hard white wheat. Okay. So we get together this nice Play-Doh textured ball of starter, and this is gonna just sit out at room temperature for a few hours today, and then I'm gonna pop it in the fridge until the next time that I want to bake. That's it. The simplest sourdough routine. I only take this out of the fridge and discard into the recipe that I'm making, and then feed it again and pop it back in the fridge until the next time I want to use it. I have been loving this. It has been working really, really well. It's a lot more low maintenance and I think more effective, and I like the flavor better than a really liquid starter. It's been about an hour and it's time for us to go ahead, add our salt, and start developing a little bit of gluten. This bread is already changed so much just in the hour of letting it sit and hydrate. It's like having your beverage in the morning. You just need a little bit of time before you're ready to cooperate with others. Same thing. Now that it's had a little bit of time to sit, it's going to be so much easier to work with, and it's going to give us a way better end product. While a lot of times when we're making bread, we flour the surface, it is really easy to over flour our fresh milled bread. And sometimes what works even better is using a little bit of water on your hands and your work surface to help prevent sticking. So this dough is already so much nicer. It's not sticking to my hands at all. It's nicely hydrated and fairly stretchy with no hands-on work from me whatsoever. This Autolyse thing, seriously life-changing for me when I accepted it. So now we're just gonna go ahead and add our salt. We have 2 teaspoons of salt here, and I just sprinkle it all over. You can see this is why you wouldn't want to use a really chunky rock salt, because trying to incorporate it like this would poke holes in your dough and it wouldn't start to dissolve and mix in with your dough very easily at all. So now we're going to start developing the gluten. You can do stretch and folds. You can do actual old-fashioned kneading like this. Either way is going to be fine. But what I have really found super helpful is you need to be a little bit gentler with this dough. You don't really need to put a ton of elbow grease into it. You need to build the strength without ripping that first layer of skin. So once you start to meet resistance, you need to stop and give it a little bit of time and space. So right now, I'm just gonna go ahead and do a little bit of kneading, and once we hit resistance, I'll show you guys what I mean, and we'll take a pause. Okay, right about here. It's starting to not want to stretch very easily. I haven't broken this top layer of skin yet, so it's still not really sticking to my hands. It's still clean and easy to work with. But if I keep kneading this and keep pushing it, it's going to start to break down. It's gonna get really, really sticky, and it's gonna be a pain. It's gonna be very hard to work with. So I'm quitting right now. Before, I'll show you guys on the underside. If I keep stretching, I'm gonna end up with this. Can you see how it starts to break? Those gluten strands are just not able to hold up. And then this gets really quite sticky. It's suddenly sticking to my hands and it's getting messy and hard to work with. So once you start to meet resistance in your dough, go ahead and stop. Don't try to keep going because you think you need to knead your bread for a certain amount of minutes and you need to really just put some elbow grease in. This is gonna respond much better to a slightly gentler touch. So I'm just gonna get this kind of reshaped one more time. even just with that little pause, it's already so much more extensible. So this is gonna go back into the dish and it's gonna sit for about 10 minutes and I'm gonna do that again. I usually do this about 3 times for my bread, and you can do the window pane test if you wanna check for elasticity, give it a 10-minute rest, then do your window pane test. But I honestly don't do that very often. But about 3 sets of this need rest, need rest, need rest cycle seems to be about spot on for me. Don't stress out too much about being on a strict schedule. I don't even set a timer really. I just do this when I'm in the kitchen, and when I have a chance, I'll open this up and do another set of stretch and folds or take it out and knead it. But if you do it, 15 or 20 minutes or even 6 to 8 minutes in between, it's not going to be a big deal as long as your dough is responsive, it's stretching easily, and you're not forcing it. Totally fine. All right, so we are done with this for now. Depending on what time of day you start your dough, you could start this in the morning and bake at night. You could start this at night right before you go to bed and bake first thing in the morning. With this amount of starter and this recipe, that schedule works pretty well, really consistently for me. That's with a 6 to 9 hour fermentation window. And again, this really depends on the temperature of your house as well. If you want to speed it up, use more starter. If you want to slow it down, you can use less starter. You can let this ferment in a colder room or even in the refrigerator. And you can also use more salt. More salt will slow down your fermentation as well. So there's a lot of room to play and learn exactly what works for you and to adjust this to fit your schedule and your needs. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Good morning. It is time to now shape our bread. First thing we're gonna do though is go ahead and get the oven preheated to 450. And go ahead and pop your pan of water in there to help get that steam going too. And some newer ovens actually have a steam bake setting. So if you happen to have that, go ahead and use that setting. If not, zero worries. All right, so that's gonna heat up while we go ahead and get our dough shaped. You can shape this however you want at this point. Today we're gonna do a kind of long, slender, more baguette shape, but you could also do one big loaf. You can do round, oblong. You could also, turn this into pizza crust or buns, pretzels, whatever you want. This is super flexible. And if you'd like more detailed tutorials on all of the ways that you can shape a basic dough, let me know in the comments. I could do a video all about all the different ways that you could shape this dough. But for now, let me show you how we're gonna shape it into 2 baguette style loaves. So we're gonna start with just a really basic pre-shape on both. I'm gonna cover these and let them sit and rest for about 10 minutes. All right, just a quick little test to make sure this is extensible and not gonna resist shaping, and we can go ahead and get started. So since I'm going for a baguette shape, I'm gonna kind of maintain a rectangular shape this whole time. If you're gonna shape it a different way, there's different techniques, and we can get into that more later. But right now, I'm just gonna fold this top edge down to the middle, turn it around, and do the same thing on this side, top edge, down. So again, we're just folding the top half to the middle, flipping it around, folding the top half down over the middle, and then just giving it a little bit of a push back to tighten that surface tension. Now we'll set this one aside and we'll give this one a little roll. So we've already got a decent baguette-ish shape, but we're just gonna use the kind of soft palmy parts of our hands and our thumbs here to wiggle it down and seal those ends a little bit more. This gives you the final shape. And you can go really long and skinny if you want, or you can leave it a little bit more plump. This is kind of the shape I like. So this is what we're gonna roll with today. Set that one aside, and we're gonna do the same on this one. There you go. So try to get them fairly even, but even if you have a wonky loaf, it's still gonna taste amazing, so don't stress too much about the shape. Now you could pop this straight onto a baking tray to do its final proof, but I do like to go through the effort of using a proofing cloth, and you can buy these online, like specialty baguette cloths. I don't bother. I just use a tea towel, something with a fairly tight weave, and that works just fine. And then we're gonna sprinkle a tiny bit of rice flour on here to help it not stick. This is the same concept as using like a Banneton basket, a designated proofing basket. It just helps give your dough a little bit of structure while it's going through its second rise. Then we're gonna put this top side down. Okay, so seam side up. Same thing with this one. Okay. Now we're just gonna pinch in between and cozy them up next to each other here. So they're gonna kind of lean on each other for support, and I'm gonna wrap this around just like that. Not too tight, but this gives it a little bit of tension so that it is kind of holding its shape while it's going through its final ferment here. So we're gonna let this just rest and proof on the counter for about another 30 minutes, and then we'll pop them in the oven. Let's go ahead and take a peek. We're gonna see if these are risen and ready to bake. I always like to do the poke test. It's not 100% accurate all the time, but it's a pretty good indicator on if your dough is ready. And give it a little poke. If the dough springs back fairly, slowly, if there's a tiny bit of a dent left over, that's fine. That's good, that's what we're looking for. If it pops back immediately, it's probably not proofed yet. And if you poke it and it doesn't pop back at all, then it's probably a little bit overproofed. So I think we're at that sweet spot. It looks good. It's been about a half an hour. That's pretty on par. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to getting these onto the baking tray and in the oven. Now I have this cute little bread lame because I bake a ton. I invested in this a few years ago, but if you're not there yet, zero worries. Use a nice sharp knife. Even a serrated knife can work. You just need to get a couple scores in. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. So on these, I like to do 3 kind of diagonal slashes. That's the very classic baguette. It rises really nice. You can also do a line straight down the middle. You can get fancy and do an S. You can experiment, have fun, no stress. Now remember, our oven is preheated to 450, and we're just gonna pop these in for about 25 to 30 minutes. I know it's super, super tempting to cut into fresh, warm bread, but if you can have any self-restraint at all, wait. This is still cooking internally, and if you can leave it to cool down for at least an hour or so, the internal texture is going to be so much better. So a little bit of patience, wait for this to cool down, but you're so close to having fresh, delicious, amazing bread. This turned out beautifully. I'm so excited to cut into it. It's still just a tiny bit warm, but we're gonna go ahead and slice into it. First though, I wanna share the beautiful sound effects. It smells amazing, which you can't smell over video, but listen to the crust. Aren't those beautiful sounds? And you can tell it's pretty well baked too. So this is bound to be an excellent loaf. Let's go ahead and cut into it. So yeah, still a little bit warm, but that's okay. It's gonna be delish. You can see it's a nice even crumb all the way around. No massive holes, but a nice even crumb, so it was evenly fermented. I cannot wait to have a little taste of this, so let's put some toppings on. Maybe a little jam. It's so good. The crust is really nice and chewy. It's not a super thick crust that you can't get through, that you're gonna break teeth on, which I love, but it's still got a good amount of chew in the crust. And then the middle is that nice classic sourdough chewy texture. It's super yummy. It's one of my favorite breads. I hope that you guys enjoy it. So after you have baked your bread, I mean, you might eat it all in one setting, but chances are you'll have a bit left over that you want to store for the next couple of days. So what I like to do is slice from the middle, put them together like this, and then one of two options. I really enjoy using a beeswax wrap like this. This is a homemade one that's seen better days, but it's the right size for a baguette. Either that or a bread bag like this works really well for keeping your bread just out on the counter or in a bread box for a few days. This is also perfect if you're going on a little picnic and you want to wrap things up for travel. I especially like the beeswax wrap for that because it sticks together a little bit. And you just have this nice little package. I hope you guys enjoyed this video series. If you have missed any of the previous episodes, I will link them in the description so you can go back and catch up on them. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you have any other questions, comments, concerns, if you make this recipe, I'd love to hear how it goes for you. And if you want a little bit more one-on-one help, you're looking for somewhere where you can share your journey and get a little bit more guidance, consider joining me on the Patient Preservers membership platform. I am there to answer all your questions, to give you that one-on-one help. We do live monthly Q&As, there's special discount codes. It's super fun. Check that out in the description as well, and I will see you guys next time.